Good morning. I'm Meredith Blackwell, and this is Don Pfister, and we are here to interview Matías Cafaro. We'll introduce him better in a minute. And we're doing what's called the Oral History of Mycology project. We're on the University of Florida campus in the Hilton Hotel, and we are here for the Mycological Society of America meeting, so we can find so many mycologists around. And today is the 12th of July, 2022. So, Don.
Great, thank you. Thanks for coming, Matias. What we always try to do and make sure we're beginning is to get a background. Okay. So where were you born, and your educational background and your introduction to fungi.
Okay, well, my name is Matías Cafaro. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I study biology there. And one of the interesting things is I went into university to actually work on biotechnology aspects of things. And like typical undergrad that has no idea what to do, I wanted to just start working in a lab, and one of the things that I knocked doors after finishing genetics, and they said, oh, there's a project that it works with fungi. And I was like, I don't know anything about fungi. And so I said, well, you can learn. So the first thing I know, I was working with endophytes of grasses. So, and I had no idea what an endophyte was, what a fungus was, or what an anamorph was. And I remember I spent the first 2 weeks reading about fungi. So,
Learning lots of terms.
yes, a lot of terms. And then that became my undergraduate thesis project. And I became really interested in fungi, and I switched gears. I just got my degree. And when I finished there, I became really interested in the interactions between fungi and insects. And when I went to my advisor there, I said, like, I want to study La Bulbinialis. And he said, no, you're not going to get funding here for that. So I said, okay, what can I do? And so at that time, it was funny because Bob Lickford had posted an ad to work with fungi in insects.
And you were in Buenos Aires when you saw this.
And I saw this, and it was posted on a board. I was like,
You mean a physical?
yes, because Bob was good friend with Dr. Wright.
Jorge Wright.
Jorge Wright.
He was a distinguished.
He was a distinguished mycologist that was the head of the lab that I was working.
And also, you know that Bob Lickford was born in
Brazil.
In Brazil,
Yeah.
So he's
So-
attuned to South America.
So he was constantly sending information of different aspects of these things, opportunities. And so I wrote to him, and he just wrote back. He said that I was interested, and so he made a decision. He said, well, you can come either. I have funding right now, and you can come either to do a pre-doctoral training, or you can come and do a PhD. And I said, like, okay, fine, I'll go there.
Okay, now before we go on to your move to Kansas, could you tell us a little bit more about Jorge Wright? Because, you know, I've known his work, and he was a corresponding member, which is now called honorary mycologist. He was a member.
Yeah, he was a member of MSA.
And he was an honorary member, so that means he had been elected by the membership.
Yeah, by the time I joined the group, I mean, I was working with Daniel Cabral, who was a disciple of his, but he was still around, and he was still the head of the whole mycology division, which in Buenos Aires was basically half of the botany department.
Really?
Yeah. No, well, it's been so strong.
It's traditionally very, very strong mycology.
Yeah, well, we know it's Pegazzini.
Yeah. And so Jorge Wright was still there, and well, and no, everybody just called him plain and simple doctor.
Yeah.
That was it.
Doctor.
No other name was needed. So so he was very well known mycologist. He had trained in Michigan, I think,
With Smith.
with Smith, and then he went back to Buenos Aires. He was a Guggenheim scholar, and then he expanded a lot of the basic mycology that has been make that program really strong for many years. And he had trained a bunch of different people, which are still there, some of them. And so by the time I was there, he was retiring. You know how these people never retire, it just takes forever. And
Watch it.
he was he was very well known for his work on tulostoma.
Right.
That was his group. And I even managed to get a little bit of classes with him. And it was really.
Was he a good teacher?
He was a good teacher. Very old-fashioned teacher, though. So he wanted our memory to work like his, and that did not work that way. But it was interesting. I respected him very much. And we got along really well. So it was a great mentor. Of course, my main mentor was Daniel Cabral, who also passed away, and so he was. But you see, I was working with endophytes with Daniel, and Dr. Wright was mostly in the lab.
And these were the Clavis epitaceous endophytes.
Yes. I was working. I mean, at the end of my little thesis that I did there, I was doing isozymes of isolates from native grasses of the Patagonia. And it's ended up being a new species of epicloe. Oh. That's what it was. Well, at that time they had a different name.
Was it one of the ones that's insect?
No, this
Fertilized?
is no. This is one that it just is it's transmitted through seeds. Okay. It's like vertical transmitted, and
so it never forms.
No, and that's the problem in South America. They don't. These epicloid type endophytes do not form sclerotia or any structure. So you actually have to study as endophytes. And I think the original name that we were using then was Neotyphodium. Now we just did away with that, and so it's epicloe.
So you end up going to Lawrence, Kansas, and I think it's interesting that you were supported on the NSF PEAT program, which was a program that was developed around the idea that we were training a new generation of systematists.
That's correct. It was a wonderful program, actually. I remember I arriving in Lawrence, and I didn't understand where I was, essentially.
Did you spoke English as you do now?
Yes, I did. I mean, I was
quite good.
I was lucky enough to had an education in a private school when I was young, so I knew English. I continued studying English. I liked languages.
From what age?
Oh, I studied English since I was 6.
Yeah.
6-year-old, and so I have been, but I never actually had to use it every single day. So after the third day arriving in Kansas, my head was going to explode. I was like, oh God, I'm tired.
I mentioned that people got headaches. I asked someone yesterday if she got a headache, and she said no. And I said, well, someone had told me that it must have been you.
Yeah, well, it was interesting for me because all of a sudden I was like switching languages and had to learn. It's not just languages. I mean, I arrived in the middle of the night in Kansas, and I had no idea where I was and what was I doing. But that's when Bob came to get me at the airport. And the interesting part is I came to this Pete grant.
That's Bob Lickvart.
And Bob Lickvart Robert Lickford, he was a retired professor. He was already retired, and these were most very, very productive years of his retirement. Yeah. And I was his last grad student, actually.
And just to interject a little bit, I was a program officer at NSF during this time. I wasn't there when the program was originated, but Don had one of the proposals funded too.
Yeah, well, there's a connection there.
There's a strong connection here with that story. We'll get into that later.
We'll do it later. but I just wanted to point that out. And how many groups had these proposals? Were there about
I
15,
don't know.
25?
Maybe
I think
something
that
like that.
Yes,
it went several years.
It went several years. I think the original call was in '95, or
I couldn't tell you exactly.
Yeah, and I don't remember. I just remember that I was there 24 years ago now. So it was probably about 26 years
Well,
ago.
and it went on for, what, 4 years, 5 years maybe of funding over
There were
the...
2 groups funded, I think,
I think there
two
were
rounds.
3.
Were they 3
I
rounds?
think there were
Okay.
3 rounds.
Okay, but it was there for a while.
It was there for a while. There were 5-year proposals. The first cohort was in '95. I remember that because that's what I was in.
Yeah,
And
I
you
think
were
that
too.
was ours, was the 95 then.
Yeah, you got in the '95 cohort of the Pete grant. There were several fungal-related.
I
I
can't
think-
remember the others.
There were a few. There was Ron Peterson,
Oh, yeah.
you, and Lickford, and I don't know if I'm missing someone else. The Kittredge.
Yeah, that's right.
Kittredge.
Oh, of course. Martha Powell and Joyce
and-
Loncourt, and
Yeah.
that paid off too.
Yeah, and so those were the 4 that I remember. Then came others.
Yeah. Well, there were insects and other groups.
Things. So those were really, that program was really something. Was very interesting. So anyway, well, I'm not going to get into. So I came through that program to Kansas, and I just started working there, and it was great because I arrived in January because I remember that Bob wanted me. He talked to me and he said, look, well, I can offer you this, you can come, but you need to come as soon as possible. And in my head, I was like, oh, well, I still have to sit for the GRE, I had to do the TOEFL test, I had to do all of these exams, and so maybe I'll be there in August. And he said, no. My funding goes through there, and you have to be here in January. Oh, okay.
So you arrived in the middle of winter, and you had been in summer?
Yes. I was coming from summer into the middle of winter, into a town that I didn't know anything about, and...
But it was fairly small compared to where you'd been.
Yes. I mean, I'm a city person. I grew up in a big city, and then I come to Lawrence, Kansas in the middle of the winter. So it was interesting, let's put it that way.
So what did your family think about all this first mycology and then moving to the U.S. to study?
I don't think my family thought anything about it. They were never expecting me to actually move. They always, my family they are professionals. My father's an engineer. My mom is art history. She got her PhD recently. I mean, when she was 70. Yes, we are the 2 PhDs in the family. But she got her PhD in her 70s, like about 10 years ago. And so so they always kind of understood a little bit of professional world, academia. They always encourage us to study. I mean, all of my siblings are professionals as well. But they always thought that, I should get a master's degree. And then I came up with like, no, I'm just gonna
Yeah,
go
go
do
straight
I'm
to
gonna go
Kansas.
do a PhD, and they were like, oh, okay.
Did they know about the tornadoes in Kansas?
No, they didn't know anything. I mean, Kansas is not even in the map of most Americans. So imagine foreigners would not even consider where Kansas is.
But they've never heard about the Wicked Witch and all this
Oh,
kind
well,
of thing.
yes.
Did that get to Kansas?
Yes, yeah, that part.
I mean, get to-
Yeah, that part we knew, but really, I was fascinated because I didn't even know what airport to arrive into, so it was funny.
So, talk a little bit about these organisms that you worked on
Okay.
for your PhD.
So when I always was interested in the interactions between fungi and insects, and one of the things I got to interested when Bob Blackwell was looking for students was that he works on the trichomycetes. The trichomycetes is literally a very obscure group, and it's hidden. So most mycologists don't even know about them.
And they're not all fungi.
And they're not all fungi, but
Anymore.
they're not anymore. But that came after.
Never was.
Well, we don't even have the name anymore. The trichomycetes now is an ecological group. I still review papers when they call them trichomycetes because they don't want to abandon the name, because it gives us a sense of identity.
Yeah.
But if you use a lowercase t.
Yeah, it used to be this group that it was the other class of Zygomycota. So the Zygomycota remember in the old days, the Zygomycota was divided into, when Zygomycota existed, it was divided into the Zygomycetes and the Trichomycetes. So the Trichomycetes was Bob Blackwell's special group.
Four orders.
Yeah, with 4 orders: the Harpelalis, the Ecrinalis, the Acceleralis, and the Amebidielis. And when I arrived into the lab, they were working on systematics of the group in general. And there were people already working with the Harpelalis, which is the most common group and the most common order, and that's associated with mostly, not only, but mostly with aquatic insect larvae of mayflies, stoneflies, and other groups of insects, rarely other arthropods. And so that's where a few of these fungi can be cultured. If we had like let's imagine that we have described more or less like 300 species, and maybe
In Harpelalis.
in Harpelalis, and maybe 1% of that or less can be culture. So we had that culture collection available to us, and so at that time there were people starting to do molecular work. So I thought, well, if somebody's covering that, I'm just gonna do something else. And so
Was that Merlin?
Merlin was doing some of the Harpelalis, but Merlin White, yes, who's a professor at the Boise State University in Idaho. And then, but there was a postdoc also from Argentina doing the molecular work, Alexandra Gottlieb. She was doing the first molecular tree of Smithium with ITS and a load of 18S. So she was doing that, and so I was trying to work on Acceleralis, Ecrinalis, and Amebidielis, the other 3 orders, just for fun.
2 of which were not.
2 which ended up not being fungi.
And you helped show that.
Yes, I was working with the Amebidielis and the Ecrinalis, and Acceleralis never worked. It was very hard to get sequences. It was very difficult to work with, and even though I had a lot of samples collected, but that was very, very difficult to work with. And it turns out that it's because we know that many years later, because the genes have a lot of insertions, so the primers don't work. So we had to do a lot of different twiddling with that. But for at that time, molecular work was like by hand. It's not like today. So basically, we had to start working with this group of organisms that you can culture. So it's what you find under the microscope. You have to extract DNA from that, and it was a challenge at times. And the other challenge is that the databases are not what they are today. So you were not going. I mean, you couldn't blast whatever you got against anything because it wasn't there.
Right.
And you were never sure what you.
You had no idea what you were getting. And one of the things that happened to me was that I was working with this group, the Amebidielis and the Ecrinalis, and all of my sequences were bouncing back with either contaminants or unknowns or things that didn't make sense to me, and with protest. And I said, well, another failed attempt. And I spent 2 years on failed attempts. And until one day I said, like, maybe it's not a failure. Maybe these things are not fungi. And
And you opened the whole world.
and then it's like, oops,
I'm a mycologist.
I'm a mycologist. I don't want to work on these things that are not fungi. Anyway, so as the story goes, my dissertation ended up being about these fungi not being fungi, being a group of basal protists somewhere in the open the basal lineage between animals and fungi somewhere there in an obscure place. So that was interesting. That was my.
That was a big deal.
It was a big deal, but I was afraid to tell Bob.
Oh.
When I actually had enough data, and I was like, okay, am I sure about this? Is it true? And so I just didn't know how to break the news to him. I was like, because he developed the first Ecrinalis group, the first Enterobrius discoveries. He worked for many years on millipedes, and that was his heart was there.
Yeah.
And I said, like, oh, sorry, I just need to break this news. You are not working on fungi anymore. So that was an interesting story. So,
And how did he take it?
he was a gentleman. So remember that he was a very kind person.
He was.
He was like, but
Real
are you
gentleman.
sure? Are you sure that's true? And he was very calm about it. And I said, well, but if the data says that that's it, we're just going to need to focus on analyzing the data and make sure that that's exactly what you want to say. I said, okay, fine. I will analyze the data in and out, I promise. So after I got a few of my sequences, then you come in. I went to, I was doing, in Kansas, there was a very, very strong systematics program because that's where, but not only systematics, it was very strong in cladistics because Ed Wiley was there, was a professor there.
And you also had Chris, who was good at analysis. Was he in the museum, Chris?
Chris, yes, I know who you're talking about. Krystalka?
Yeah.
Krystalka. Yes, so there was a very, very strong cladistic group in Kansas, especially in the Natural History Museum. And so most of the techniques and the analysis things that I knew then were based on cladistics, and it wasn't a good fit for the molecular data that I had. So at the time, I was going back and forth between Kansas and Boston because I was going to Don Pfister's lab almost once a month.
And back again.
I'm back again, I'm back and again. And
All for the study of fungi?
not necessarily for the study of fungi, it's just because I am married to one of his graduate students.
Kristen Peterson.
Kristen Peterson was doing her PhD in the Farlow at Harvard.
Peak program.
The Pete program also, and that's what we got to
Pete marriage.
the Pete marriage, and we have Pete product too. We have a 16-year-old,
Massimo?
yeah, Massimo. he's a Pete product, and so I was going back and forth, and when was talking to what was going on there, and a lot of the Bayesian analysis was being developed at that time, and so I actually decided that I was going to do that analysis as well, and I did. I went and learned from some of the postdocs and
Chuck Bell, particularly, right?
yeah, Chuck Bell was there, but Chuck was leaving at the time. He was moving to Yale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and some people in the in Gonzalo Hiribert lab helped me as well, and so there was techniques and other analysis tricks that I learned there. And well, I presented that as part of my dissertation when I came back to Kansas, and being all cladists there, it was kind of a little bit of a, I wouldn't say it was a disagreement, but they actually let me present that.
And so your analyses were better.
Yeah, my analysis was better and was stronger and was better supported, and so Bob was happy with the fact that we had a very good, neat story to tell, and that's how I finished my dissertation.
And then you got rid of the second order once you were in a job, right?
No, later on, what happened? I started a different postdoc on a different track. I went back. The Acellarialis still exist. It's just that it's so hard to work with that Merlin and I help with his students. We used different techniques, more modern techniques, and we came up with different with a better analysis. But it's something that nobody has looked at anymore. It's because we know their sister with the Harpelalis, although the Harpelalis nowadays is just being destroyed into many different clades within the Kixellum mycotina. So these Acellarialis became, we assume that because they're related to them, they're somewhere there.
So you got rid of the Ecrinales.
I got rid of the Ecrinales and the Amybidialis.
Okay, but you did the Amybidiales later.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was talking
Okay.
about.
So
Yeah.
Well, we did that too.
Oh, okay, in Kansas. Okay.
And then I decided to move to a postdoc in fungus growing ants.
Yep. Which is an interesting.
It's a very, very cool.
They're Ada ants.
Yeah. The other ants, and because we hire a Kansas, when I was still in Kansas, they hire up a young faculty, Cameron Curry, who was working on that system. And so he offered me to stay as a postdoc. And I stayed there for a year. And then because he moved to Madison, Wisconsin, and I moved along with the lab. So I worked for about 2 years as a postdoc in the fungus growing ant system.
I just heard from him the other day. He's going to Canada, going back home to Canada.
He's moving to Canada?
Right. He'd closed on a house that day, like last week.
Right? I didn't know that. I haven't talked to him in a while, but last year we corresponded a little bit, but he didn't tell me that he was thinking of moving back.
Yeah.
So, around that time, you married Chris.
Yes. Around the time that I was finishing my PhD, and Chris was somewhere halfway through, maybe. So we got married, and we went to Oslo together to the International Mycological Congress in Oslo. That was 2002. So that was 20.
That was honeymoon.
That was honeymoon, yes. Honeymoon in the mycological world.
You can't get away from mycology.
No, but at the same time, we use the same trip and to collect in southern France and Spain. I was collecting samples for myself. I mean, her thesis, her dissertation project was completely different. She worked on Cyteria, which is a ascomycete from the southern hemisphere. So she actually was traveling to Argentina, New Zealand, and Australia. So her thing was completely different. But I mean, that's how it happened. And so that's it. We just got married, and eventually she came with me to Kansas and to Wisconsin, and she managed to finish her collecting data. But then I got offered a job in the University of Puerto Rico. And so
Which one?
my West.
And who had been there before you?
You're gonna do that. Okay. So before
He introduced himself to somebody the other day that way, so it's not so difficult.
It's not so difficult. Well, I moved to the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, where I'm currently still there, but I took a position that used to belong to this gentleman over here.
My first job out of my PhD was at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, and in 1971 I went there, and I was there until 1974.
So
Yeah.
yes.
And there was a hiatus, and then you came along.
Well, there were various.
No.
There were various mycologists there because also that department, for some reason, had a long tradition in mycology.
Yeah, well, when I began, Luis Rory was the mycologist, and he had worked with Lowy in Louisiana
Really?
on rusts.
He didn't get a degree.
He did. He got his PhD from.
Oh, I'll have to find out. I didn't
yeah.
know about him.
But then, rather than working on rusts, he at some point transitioned to working on human dermatophytes,
Okay.
basically. And so he had set up this little lab, and it was the Laboratory of Tropical Mycology. We had a little corner, in that old building that's now the Humanities building.
Oh, it's no longer.
It's no longer that either.
And now it's the dean's office.
So you're there.
I am there, yes.
But so anyway, he did these studies of people, and he almost ran a kind of little clinic. He had a place where he could take them and
Scrape the skin.
scrape it, and he tried to culture, and
You couldn't do that today.
no.
Well, and didn't Harry Tears have a master's student who had got a PhD in plant taxonomy who was there at some point in Mayagüez?
I don't know
It may have
that.
been between the two of you, but I'm pretty sure one of his students, Harry Tears' students, who had become a plant taxonomist.
Oh, yes. You're talking about Brecken.
Right.
Yes. He retired when I arrived.
Oh, okay.
So it's
So
funny.
It's kind of between you.
Yeah. Gary Brecken. He was a plant taxonomist. He did his master's with Tears in
Yeah, and they couldn't do PhDs at San Francisco State.
San Francisco State, and yes, he did his. I don't remember where he got his PhD,
I
but
don't know.
but he got his PhD in plant taxonomy, and he worked many years in Mayagüez. as a
Yeah,
plant
I don't,
taxonomist.
it's not ringing a bell with me, but
It
he
was
may
after
have been.
you.
It was after you, because I know that also the mycologist that was very strong was Carlos Betancourt. who came after you.
Yeah.
I
Well,
understand.
he was there with working with Luis for a period. He was gone. Was he doing a degree work and then came back
That
about the time I was leaving?
Okay, makes sense. But he's the one who actually, in Mayagüez, built the strong mycology group, and a lot of a lot of mycologists that are around that came from Puerto Rico work with him. I mean, Sharon Cantrell is one of them. She did her master's with him.
I had a really nice trip one time. It was sponsored by the McNair grant and program, I guess. And so I got to go to all these places and then to the Puerto Rican Mycological Association. So I gave like 4 talks. And it was really, really interesting to see how many mycologists there were on that one small island.
Yes, there are a few of us there. Yes, that's correct. So yeah, but while we were talking about that,
Well, I was talking about another mycological connection, which was Harry Cheers.
yes, because of Harry Tears, yes,
Yeah. So you called it right.
yeah,
Okay.
that's how I remember it, and so
So how long before a hurricane came?
I was,
Was it a while?
yeah, I mean
Well, start earlier than start when you first got there.
I got there, into Puerto Rico in 2005. That was as I started as an assistant professor there, and I was very lucky because it was a time where the university was expanding, so we had a new building and new facilities, and there was an investment on part of the university to expand the department. When I arrived there, we were like 42 faculty in the Department of Biology alone. So it was big, and so I got a really good lab, and it was nice. It took me a while to get it set it up, but it was great because I was coming from postdoc, so I had submitted 2 different grants at the same time, and immediately a year later, I got my first NSF grant to work on trichomycetes, and I did trichomycetes, like the island hopping around the Caribbean, collecting these fungi, and so those were my first steps into tropical systems, because before that I have been going to different places, but never to the tropics to collect trichomycetes. I have been to the tropics to collect fungus growing ants, but that's a different story.
And I think I remember some sort of story right after you got there. There was a pond on the campus, and you had an undergraduate working in your lab.
No, the pond story is actually when I will visit you. I was a graduate student. That's a different story.
No, but maybe you found trichomycetes that were undescribed.
Oh yeah, the student.
Okay, it wasn't a pond then.
No, it wasn't a
Okay,
pond.
sorry.
But yes, it was a lot of. Well, we didn't have much information. As always, wherever you go, there are certain groups that, specifically this group, the trichomycetes in general, people don't look for them. Half of the mycology professors don't teach.
It messed me up when it turned out that the one in the millipede was not a fungus, because that was the easiest one to find.
Yes, but that's a difficult. But the funny part was that we weren't. We had a student that was interested in the. He wasn't interested in the fungi. He was interested in the ecology of the aspects of how these fungi came around. So he was looking for millipedes, actually.
Oh, okay.
but he found instead of millipedes, because there's a tiny little millipede that is not hard. It's very different than the normal morpho. It's pinkish and it has CT instead of a hard skeleton, and it grows really underneath the clippings when you cut the grass. So it's there. And so the student was looking for that, and she really found another isopods, little isopods. And instead of say, okay, well, let's look what's in there. And it turned out that that's one of the few things that we discovered there is that they had some of these acellariales, and we found, the first time we found spores, sexual spores.
That's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah.
That's what
The sexual spores.
the sexual spores of
Because I had
acellariales
been-
had never been seen or described ever, and it was a cool report, and we were like, are we sure?
Yeah, again.
Again?
When you're first, that's a problem.
Yes, and yeah, are we sure? Yes, we're sure. And so we did a little bit of microscopy and understand and just find some of the conjugating thalli, and the spores are round, which is nothing compared to the rest of the conical or biconical spores that most harpelales that we know of have. So that was another neat finding there in Puerto Rico, and we also found it in the Dominican Republic, so in the same host. So it was a neat story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was building a big gap.
Yes.
Made a zygomycete.
Yes, it was a very good contribution. So that was my first grant in 2000.
Yeah, it was early.
Yeah, it was very early, and then I got grants to work on fungus growing ants and different things around the island.
You have the Ada ants?
We don't have ARA, which is the leaf cutters. We have no leaf cutters in Puerto Rico, but we do have fungus growing ants, and there are 3 different genera of ants, but they are the lower atines. So one of them grows yeast form. The fungus is grown in the yeast form, and is really tiny, and you can find them behind the building where we are at. So it's very convenient to work on that.
Yeah, are they the ones that grow, I can't remember the name of it, it's a group that...
Oh, the coral fungi?
Yeah,
no,
these
no,
little
those
tiny-
are that's
okay.
a pterostigma,
Yeah,
the
so
ant,
that's
and we
still
don't have.
another group of
But
that.
that's another group, and
Atines.
that's another group of atines, and that one is continental South America.
And then I found it in Louisiana 2 times. Once,
did?
Once as an endophyte or we think it was an endophyte in magnolia, the big magnolia leaf.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I studied in mycology
A coral fungus.
and grew it. I thought someone was playing a joke on me when I saw it in culture because you could hardly see the mycelium and then this thing sticking up. I thought it was something somebody was fooling me with, but it wasn't.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And
So
that-
you've been teaching, and you've been an administrator.
Yes. I have been doing
You're a chair?
research. I have been the chair of the department, and that was interesting because I was the chair of the department when Hurricane Maria hit the island and destroyed half of the island, including our facilities, our building. I lost 12 years of collections in the freezers because we didn't have electricity for, I don't know, I just lost count. I think at the university we didn't have electricity for about 3 weeks. And then, so we had to turn on the generator, but there was no gas. So we couldn't actually turn on the generator 24/7, so we turned on the generator for about 4 hours a day, which wasn't enough to keep the -80 freezers running. So I lost everything.
So it was DNA you had, or was it culture?
Cultures.
Cultures.
I have cultures of Because at that point I had cultures of fungi, I have cultures of bacteria. I was working on actinobacteria and associated with termites. I was working on fungi from crabs, fungi from mangrove systems. So I had a lot of samples that they were cultures that I have already characterized, sequence, and whatnot. And I just that was a big loss for us. And then the department, the building itself, oh, that was a fantastic event. Well, I'm just sure you enjoyed that. Who was like Joe Bennett was, she was in her talk. No, not Joe Bennett. Who was telling about the Katrina that you have all the moldy building?
It was Joan Bennett, I think, probably because her house.
Yeah. So when she was telling that the mold was everywhere, well, for us was exactly the same. And I mean, we lost so many things that it was incredible. I was a mycologist in charge, and I was the director of the department. So I just said, okay, you know what? Just start taking out all of these panels and everything. If you see a fungus growing on the wall, you just cut the piece of the wall. I don't care. We need to make sure that this doesn't continue growing. And so then the dean and the chancellor came to see what was I doing. And I was destroying half of the building. And I said, and they asked me, what are you doing? It's like, well, I said, what do you want me to do? I mean, I can leave it as is and let it grow. If you don't remove the substrate, the fungi are going to continue to grow. I said, like, well, but isn't it too harsh? It's like, well, I can leave it like that and you decide. But I'm the mycologist, so I think I know what I'm doing.
Toxic black mold, is that what?
Yes, there was a lot.
There was, okay.
But in the end, they let me do it, and that was the only building that was not basically condemned after that. So I was happy with that, but it took a toll on my willingness to be the chair of the department after that.
That must have been horrible.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
You couldn't take care of your own stuff, really.
No. It was I couldn't take care of my laboratory, my home. I didn't have electricity at home for 3 months, so it was terrible. And then everybody was trying to leave the island. You couldn't, and so my major worries was that not only had to take care of a whole department, I also had to take care of my family. So for me, it was really stressful time. So actually, I was lucky enough to find a couple of tickets to get my Chris and Massimo out of the island, and just I sent them to California, where they spent 3 months in California, where she's from. She went to live with her sister, and Massimo got to go to school in California for a little while, and so that was an experience that I don't wish on anybody. So after that, I quit as chair of the department.
Oh, good, good.
But the dean wouldn't let me go.
Oh.
So he actually said, okay, fine. Now that you got rid of the department, I have a job for you. And so I want you to be the assistant dean for research at the college. And it's like, okay. So, and I promise it's less work than the department. It's like, okay. It's true.
And so
it's better than
you're
being
still
the
in
chair.
that position?
I'm still in that position.
I did it for about 1 semester at LSU.
Oh, I have been doing it for 4 years.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I told him one school year.
I kind of like enjoy it in a way. I mean, it's not hard for me to do, but it's that mentality of an administrator that you have to switch gears because now your vision is completely different.
Yeah.
And and dealing with researchers is one thing, and as a researcher, I want what I need to continue doing what I want to do, but as an administrator, it's like a bigger picture. It's like okay, it's not just you, it's the whole college, and they all want something. And I have, what are the priorities? And
And
Who's the
you're
most
the
deserving?
decider.
yes, and of course I get blamed for a lot of things, but I don't know. I try to do my best
I would think
to
they
help
would
everybody.
realize that.
Yeah.
I would think they would realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I think that you realize as when you're an administrator is that you're always responsible in some way. You know, you're responsible for
A lot more minus
more,
40s.
you know,
minus
a lot
80s.
more of everything. You know, and the decision rests in you. And one of the joys of not doing that is to realize that you're not the one. You're not the one that is responsible.
I'm at that point. I know where can I reach. I mean, and there's the limit, and beyond that, it's not my responsibility. I don't have the answer, so I try to help as much as I can within my realm, basically, and everything else. I will try to find out and help you to navigate the bureaucracy and the nightmare that it is upper administration. But other than that, I know where my responsibility ends. And so as long as I keep that in mind, I think I'm fine.
Well, I don't know if I ever told you the story of I had an NSF grant when I was there. And well, it was awarded or approved, and then I had to go through the bureaucracy of getting it approved in the college. And so I was sent to the dean's office, and for a signature. The comment was, he signed it. Forget who the dean was, but he signed it. And he dated it like, I don't know, 4 days further ahead. He said, if I date it today, it shows an efficiency that does not exist.
That's funny.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I think I know another place that should do that.
Yeah, but
There are probably lots of them.
anyway, we really should wrap it up. But do you have anything you want to say further?
no, I think. I would like to mention Bob Blackwell once more, because I think part of my growing up in MSA and in mycology in general is due to him. Mm-hmm. He was not only my advisor, he was a mentor, he was a father figure, he was a very good person. And I think this is one of the most important aspects of him as a person, not only as a mycologist. He was a great mycologist, and he was a great advisor to me, at least. But I think everybody that has gone through his lab love him very much.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful person, and I think you and Merlin were lucky enough to be able to see him. He was ill before he died, but not for that long. But you were able to.
We did a special trip to see him before he passed away, and it was 2 days. I mean, 3 days before he passed.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we actually got to see him.
That says a lot for the way you related and feel about him.
Yeah,
Yes.
to travel all that way.
Yes, we did travel to Kansas to see him before he passed.
And I think Merlin and his wife have an award.
They set up an award, an endowment fund for a travel award, or not a travel award,
it's
a research award. A research award for, I understood, for fungi.
Entomologic, insect
fungi
Yeah.
topics. Let's put it that way. So that's what it is. So
Well, really, thank you. Thank
We've
you for
enjoyed
coming.
this.
thank you for having me and listening to me.
Very different.
Oh. Oh, please. That was nice.